think we're gonna go ahead and get started here. It's just after 1 o'clock in Cincinnati, and it's just after noon in Omaha, Nebraska, where Angela's joining us today, and at the BWF headquarters in Minneapolis. So thanks for joining us today for this very important discussion. Donor experience, the key to building your pipeline. I think that donor experience is perhaps one of the most under-invested areas in fundraising. It's one of the things that we really need to be thinking about what we want to give our donors as that experience. It's all to me about how we want them to feel, how it should feel to be a donor. I think the answer is that it should feel good. It should feel good, right? That's fairly straightforward, but still, I believe it's one of those places that we have not really focused enough on in the last few years, and we're going to talk about that today and why doing so can be the key to your pipeline. So. Really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us on a Thursday afternoon. We're going to be with you for about an hour today. Will be plenty of time for Q&A. And my slides are running away from me. Angela, this one's yours.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm excited to be here with you today. Kick us off with the first most important question that we always get on these webinars. Yes, it's being recorded, and yes, you will receive that recording likely tomorrow. You'll see an email that's got the recording. So we'll try to repeat that again. It'll probably get asked 10 more times before now and then, but you will receive the recording. So we're excited to have you with us today. There's the little Q&A button that you all have access to at the bottom. So as you have questions throughout, please try to dive in and add them to that Q&A feature. It just helps us keep them organized and make sure that we try to answer as many as we can. So for those of you that I haven't had the chance to interact with directly yet, my name is Angela Altamore. As James said, I'm joining you from Omaha today. That's where I'm headquartered and based. I have spent 16, 17 years as a practitioner in all things donor relations, donor stewardship, and donor experience. I stumbled into it as a career secondhand, like many folks do in the fundraising space after spending 12 years with Hallmark cards. And so based, I think, on the customer service background that I learned in my time at Hallmark, that's translated nicely to the donor experience landscape. I learned a lot of lessons that I've continued to carry with me. And then after having spent all that time as a practitioner and building shops and building teams and programs in that space, now I have the fortune of working with a variety of clients here at BWF to help think about how to elevate that experience and how we translate that into enhanced donor retention. So that's a little bit about me. I'll kick it back to James.
Well, I'm just really enjoying going for all these hype songs in the chat. Thank you for sharing those. Some really, really great ones. Don't Look Back in Anger by Oasis is on there. That's one of my favorite all-time songs. Never thought of it as a hype song, but I think that's great. Hype song by Natasha Bedingfield, and Shut Up and Dance, Walk the Moon. Some really great songs. There was also a comment in there about the audio from a couple people. So if you're having trouble with that, let us know, and we'll see if that's an issue for everyone or just a one-time thing. And Lauren from BWF, if you're still there, if you have any advice for us on how to stop that being echoey, let us know. I'm James Barnard, Managing Vice President at BWF, joining from Cincinnati, Ohio today. I'm a self-disclosed fundraising geek. I love the data, the strategy, the creativity of the fundraising work. This is really all I've ever done professionally. It's probably all I ever will do. I started my career as a a phonophone caller back in Lancaster University in the UK. If you've ever been to one of my conference presentations, you'll have heard this before, but I was probably the worst caller they'd ever hired. I was absolutely atrocious at the job. I had two gifts in my 2-year calling career. So much so they said, you're no good at calling, but you can be a manager instead. And I managed to turn that into a career. Turns out I was a little better at the strategy side of things. Um, I truly believe, though, that a lot of what I know about fundraising, what really makes me good at fundraising, has a lot more to do with what I understand about giving. And I think that if you can start to see things from the donor perspective and start to think about what it feels like to be a donor and to be a member of the community that you care about, that's the key to success here. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today when we get into donor experience. So, pleasure to be here. We're going to cover four main areas in our agenda today. The leaky bucket. We're going to talk about donor retention, some of the challenges around that, and the very clear tie between donor retention and donor experience. And that's where we get into the experience factor, what it means to be a donor. And then we're going to talk strategy, things you can do to improve donor experience. That's where we'll get into some of the nuts and bolts of this, some of the key takeaways. And then finally, we're just going to have a little bit of insight around what it means to build a pipeline. This is something that, you hopefully will take away some tactical things, some tips and tricks. But there's an underlying narrative here that we all need to be thinking about as well. It's like, what is the impact of donor experience on fundraising, and how do we think about ROI for that? So that's an important piece of the conversation today.
Well, thanks, James. I'm going to talk briefly a little bit about BWF for those that may not be as familiar with us. But before I do, I'm going to give a shout out to Mary in the chat. Anybody that works with me at BWF knows that Duluth, Minnesota is one of my absolute favorite places in the whole wide world. I'm headed up there in another month and a half, and I am so excited. I've been up there countless times. So shout out to Mary in all things Duluth. If you've never been, it's absolutely worth the trek up the North Shore. So BWF, we've been around since 1983. The first really big project that we did and we were involved with was helping fundraise for the Statue of Liberty, and involved in the campaign related to that. We work with a variety of clients, everything from small startup nonprofits to large international organizations and higher ed and healthcare and everything in between. So we have a vast variety of expertise that we bring to the table. We have just over 100 staff members. As James mentioned earlier, our headquarters are in Bloomington, Minnesota, just outside of the Twin Cities. And we have a good chunk of our staff that works there, and then the rest of us all are fully remote. So one of the pride points to me as a staff member is that we really bring a deep level of expertise and depth of knowledge and experience by a lot of former practitioners that have now shifted to this landscape. So everything from helping you prepare and think about getting ready for campaigns and all the strategy that involves, and really making sure that we have the right team in place for the right project. So every project is a little bit different, and we pull from the variety of staff members that we have to put together the right team for the project. So we really focus on collaboration, and customizing the efforts that we have in this space. So every project is a little bit different in that landscape, and we learn from one another, and we really pride ourselves on thinking collaboratively and working with our clients to find solutions, so that it's not just us coming to folks and saying this is the way to do things, but really working together and partnering and collaborating in that space, being intentional about the projects and the expertise that we bring to that space. James, I'm going to have you advance if you would. Thank you. Really being purposeful and intentional about that. And then one of the other things that I think that sets us apart is that we have dedicated project managers and engagement teams that really help us keep track of things, and they serve as our air traffic controllers to keep all things working collaboratively. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to James, who's going to kick us into the next feature and talk about the leaky bucket.
Yeah, so the leaky bucket is an important place to start when we want to talk about donor experience. This is where we really have some really important data about what is happening in the fundraising field at the moment. And this chart and charts that look kind of like this, all telling a similar story. This is nothing new. It's the declining donor participation across the board in fundraising organizations. This decline is starting to get less steep. The data you're seeing here is from the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. So there's a few different ways this could be pulled, but this one's the FEP in particular. 3.6% year-over-year decrease in the donor count, which is the fifth consecutive year of declines. It is getting less steep each year, but that's still a decline. Gotta be honest with this, I'm just getting really fed up of this being the narrative in fundraising that donor counts are going down. I'm so bored of talking about donor counts going down and so fed up with just the idea of like we just accept this and like there's nothing we can do about it. And I've heard people who are leaders in the field say, well, there's nothing we can do about donor counts going down. That's a fool's errand to try to fix that. I don't believe that, and at BWF we don't believe that either. We really have decided in the last few years, we say, we need to eject this as the status quo. We need to turn things around, and it's upon us as consultants, as a company, to help to figure out how we turn around this trajectory and get things on the right track. So that's why we have a whole division in our company that is called Engagement and Donor Experience. Angela and I are two of the leaders of that division. And this is what we do every single day, try to think about how we reverse this trend. And I got to be honest, I love to brag on this, but we have been pretty successful in this. Our managed service clients, that where we do all the comprehensive services for them, for their programs, we saw an increase of 8.3% in their donor counts on average last year. So really excited that we're starting to turn around things there and unlock the kind of keys to success. That's not really what this webinar is about, but I think this is a good starting point to frame the rest of the conversation. When we think about donor retention, we start to very easily see a big part of the problem here. Again, fundraising effectiveness project data. They estimate that 43.3% of first-time donors, um, that is actually incorrect. These two are switched. 43.3% is the overall retention rate according to FEP. 18.9% is the first-time donor retention rate, right? Apologies for that error on this slide. We'll have to get that corrected. Um, the key here is that we are losing a very significant chunk of people every year. More than half of those donors are not making another gift a year later. 4 out of 5 donors who are making their first time gift to an organization are not giving again the following year. So oftentimes, if we want to reverse the trend of donor counts declining, the first thing to do is look at the retention rates. If we need to get these above 50% for the overall retention, it's very industry specific or sector specific, I should say. And we want to get that first time donor retention rate up into the high 20s, if not the 30s, because we're just creating an uphill battle for ourselves if we're losing so many people each year. I also think that we need to rethink retention a little bit. We tend to focus on a fairly traditional model, which is whatever our fiscal year is. If they make a gift in one year and then they make an additional gift the next year, there's a place for that metric. It's perfectly good. But I also like to work with clients to think about the 6, 12, and 18 month retention. So that's the percentage of clients who make a gift and then give again within 6 months, give again within 12 months, and within 18 months. It's a little bit more responsive to the donor. So if they're in the habit of giving at a certain time of year or at a certain frequency throughout the year, one of the keys to increasing that donor retention rate is to reduce the gap between the gifts. I'll get into that more in just a moment. But if we can start to think about this as not just like retaining donors, but how can we get donors to give more frequently? Give you a quick example. The easiest way to raise more money is to take your donors who are giving every 3 to 5 years and work to get them to give every 1 to 2 years. So essentially reducing the gap between the gifts. That's a pretty good way to get a significant percentage increase to your annual revenue because you're just going to get a lot more gifts that way.
James, can I just chime in there on something that you
Yeah.
said? You talked about tracking retention, not just at the end of a fiscal year or once a year, but thinking about doing it more frequently. The other thing that I think that can help with is from the donor relations or experience lens.
Mhm.
Oftentimes we struggle in the field to try to figure out the impact that our work has, whether it's event attendance is a really good example. So instead of waiting a full year, that ability to look at what's happening 6 months after the event, 3 months after the event, 9 months after the event, 12 months after the event, or the impact report or things, gathering that retention point sooner can help you measure that in a different way as well. So I think there's added value to think about it from that lens too.
Absolutely. The number of factors that are linked to donor retention. This is stuff that we've seen working with hundreds of clients over the years. It's also there's research out around some of this as well. Not all of this is causational. Some of it's more correlational in nature, but the amount of the gift, smaller gift amount, is going to result in a lower retention rate. The fundraising effectiveness project data around that is basically you've given less than $100, it's a 31.3% retention rate compared to people. I like to look at the one that's in the 500 to 5K range, which is 61.7%. Now, those are averages across all of the nonprofit sector. Certain places, higher education tends to see higher rates than those. It's a little bit dependent, but um, these things do tell us that if we are getting smaller gifts, we are likely to get fewer donors retained. Apologize. The gift count is another one, which is the more gifts a donor has made indicates the likelihood of retention. That's fairly obvious, but there's some pretty significant growth in the retention rate there as you get into giving 2 or 3 or more gifts. And then the organization type as well. Just a quick example on this, I mentioned it earlier, but our 5-year average of clients overall, the retention rate was 49.38%. But when we looked at higher education, that was 53.66%. So it's a little bit of an increase. What I think you see here in this data is that retention is all about habitual giving. It's not that, if we can just get people to give more, then they're likely to give again. People who give more are making more meaningful, intentional decisions about their philanthropy. People who give more frequently are starting to build a relationship with an organization. On the organization type side of things, what is happening there is that the higher ed institutions they really view having their relationships with donors as being a finite pool of people because they're very focused on their alumni audience. And that's not the same for other places where there's a lot more donor churn. So we do tend to see higher rates of retention among higher education. Part of that could be that we have better donor relations programs and we're really focused on donor experience. Part of it also is just the nature of the relationship that those donors have. They tend to think of wherever they went to school as a lifelong relationship. So that's really good. Whereas other things in their life sort of come and go over time. There is some data out there on healthcare organizations. There was a question on that in the chat. I don't have it handy, but we can follow up with that after today's webinar. Absolutely. So let's think about experience and why this is tied so much to retention rates. This is some research from Adrian Sargent. He's a British academic, and BWF has sort of summarized this. There's surveys of people who stop giving. So we often ask people the question of like, why do you give to an organization, which is really important, and we can get some really good data out of that. But one of the more interesting questions to me is like, why did you stop giving? And it's something I've actually encouraged clients to do is taking your lapsed donors and having a survey that goes out. If somebody hasn't given in, let's say, 18 months, asking them why they stopped. For one thing, it's a way of showing them that you noticed and that their gift mattered. And it can be a great tool for actually getting them to make an additional gift because they maybe didn't even realize themselves or they realized that you did notice. And on the other hand, you start to learn some important things about why people are no longer supporting the organization, which can actually be more valuable. That critical feedback can have a little bit more of an impact than the really positive feedback that the people who love you say. But so many of these things, there's some of them that we can't control. Things like I can no longer afford it, obviously death, relocation, these are out of our control. There's some of these that are sort of fundraising issues, like they've asked for inappropriate amounts of money or they're supporting other areas. Um, but a lot of these things are controllable, and they really come down to donor experience management. I feel like other causes are more deserving of my support. Well, that just means we're not communicating impact in the right way. I didn't get my support acknowledged. I have no memory of even giving. They didn't inform me how my money was used. They don't need my support. All of these things are experience issues. Really, a lot of them are communication issues. They're how we talk to donors and show appreciation, acknowledgement, and all of those things. Um, I think this is an important piece to remember because it starts to remind us like a lot of this is actually in our control. If we can get somebody to make their first gift to an organization, that's really the hardest thing to do. It should be relatively straightforward to create such a good experience that that donor wants to make an additional gift once, whether that's, a few months later, 6, 12 months later, whenever it is. And I'll hand over to you, Angela.
Yeah, so I just chime into that. I think going back to the comment that James made earlier, the stats that he shared about and getting tired of the industry just sort of accepting the status quo that retention rates are dropping. And I think that last slide is a good example to prove that that's not necessarily true, right? That we have the ability to change. We don't just have to assume that that's the way that it has to be. Just because it's always been that way doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. So when we think about experience, we really want to unpack that a little bit. And we felt like it would be a good opportunity to really think about what does that mean and how do we think about that? And absolutely, Vicky, I could not agree more with that comment that you just made that they're not giving to our orgs, they're giving through us because of the missions, because they believe in the organization and in what it is doing to make an impact on whatever the cause is. So yes, you are absolutely spot on in that sense. So I think a few things that are worth calling out and worth sort of setting the stage for the rest of our conversation together today. When I think about experiences, I think it's really important to start by recognizing that it's not just one thing. It's not an experience. It's an experience that the donor has with our organizations and with our institutions over the entire life cycle that they have with us. And that might be a year, might be 5 years, it might be 50 years or more. And so we want to really think about where are the opportunities to deepen that sense of connection, and help them see that impact more clearly so that they continue to support us and continue to believe in the work that they're doing on that we are doing on their behalf through their funding. So I really encourage clients to think about really being intentional, to take the time to design the time that you're spending, that the donors are spending with you. When you take that time to think about that and be intentional about what those interactions are like or what those touch points are like, we pause and we reflect, and it's an opportunity to really just think differently. When we focus, or whether, excuse me, whether we focus on acquisition or stewardship or major gifts, no matter what your role is in the landscape of your department and your team, this applies to you. Donor experience is not just one team's job or one person's job. While there may be a team that has that title, everybody plays a role. Think about it more as a system. It's not just a moment, it's a system that we have in our shops and the opportunity to leverage. It's not a team, but rather think of it as a shared responsibility. Oftentimes, when I work with clients, I use the example that whether you're the receptionist that directs calls and gets them to the right person in the organization, whether you're working on the IT side and you're keeping the website operational so folks can find the contact information or get online to make a gift easy, whether you're the back end research and support team that makes sure that your fundraisers have what they need to go out and have a successful conversation around a kitchen table with somebody face to face, or whether you're on the event side and you're creating some sort of bespoke gathering, and engaging folks in that community perspective. Everybody plays a role in developing those experiences. So when we start to think about it less as stewarding and less as a transaction, then we think about it more and leverage it and can see it more as a pipeline infrastructure. So we can
Mhm.
engage at a deeper level. We can find ways to be more memorable in those interactions so that they can feel donors can continue to feel comfort with us and feel trust within our organizations. So,
There's a
yep, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add, just commenting on something in the chat and to build on your points, Angela, the language donor experience, I think, is very important to me. I think that matters a lot that we call it that because one of the things to me that comes to mind is like the experience starts before somebody actually makes the gift as well. So we often think about donor relations as a sort of um, responsive strategy. Somebody makes a gift and then we do stuff after the fact. The experience starts before their first gift is ever made. It's how we solicit for that gift. The thing I often thinking about with clients is like the online giving experience is a very specific thing. But I'm sure you've all tried to support an organization that you care about, and it's just this unbelievably frustrating experience. It's like 15 steps and really complicated. That's part of your experience as well, and that's going to stick with you perhaps just as much as when somebody, says thank you or whatever. So I think that's just thinking about the terminology and why experience matters is an important piece.
Mhm. Yeah, a great way to think about that, James, would be to think about the experiences that we have with everyday brands that we interact with. I'll use Disney as an example. You could use your local grocery store, your local coffee chain, or Coca-Cola or Pepsi, since you see them advertising on the TV all the time. That experience with that brand starts the moment that you see that commercial. Or if you've ever gone on a trip to Disney, that experience starts the moment that you find out you're going to Disney, right? And it brings to all these emotions come up. And so the brands that we interact with from the for-profit sector have this figured out, so they know how to hook you and how to get you to all of a sudden you're sitting on your couch and you're watching TV and you're not hungry at all, and then a commercial comes on for Domino's pizza, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, I want Domino's now, right? You have that instinct. So how can we create that notion of sort of being mindful and being present with our donors? So James, I'm going to ask you to thank you. So when we think about those experiences and really thinking about being intentional about how we design the experiences, that is something can be done when we put the donor at the heart of our strategy and being strategic about these opportunities. When we do this really well, an engaging experience helps the donor feel like they're part of the mission, right? To the comment that was made earlier in the chat, that they're not giving to our organization, they're giving through us to achieve whatever the mission and the objective is of our organizations. And so we want to invite them to be part of that community if they choose to. We know that donors don't upgrade because of capacity alone, and we know that we can't control their capacity. But to reference the slide that James referred to earlier from Adrian Sargent, we have a lot that is within our control. So if they don't upgrade because of capacity, they upgrade because they have confidence in the work that we're doing and connection with us. So by being intentional in how we're taking the time to design those interactions, and recognizing, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, but recognizing that the experiences happen inside individuals, not necessarily as a full group. Sometimes it's a little bit of both, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And we want to make sure that we're engaging and involving donors throughout the process. And the easiest way to do that is keeping them at the forefront when we're thinking about the strategy. It's amazing to me when I'm working with clients when I'll say, have you talked to your donors about this? Have you surveyed about this? Have you asked about this? And more often than not, the answer is no. We just know that this is what they want. We hear that maybe from one person, but really taking the time to ask and to listen and to learn from our donors makes our work a lot easier and a lot more impactful and powerful and meaningful. So creating that community and that connection. And at the end of the day, if we've done all of these things right, the goal is that they walk away from the experience or the interaction or the engagement thinking that they've done something that matters. That's what it's really all about. So I mentioned that there's only so much that's within our control. James, can I have you? Thank you. The This was
Just
probably one of the hardest lessons for me to learn as a practitioner, and it took me years. And now I work with clients to navigate this, but recognizing and being okay with the fact that there is only so much of this experience that we can control. So while we can do everything to earn their trust and to earn their confidence and to invite them to that community of like-minded supporters, we can't fully control the experience itself. It's hard to accept, but the sooner you can do that, the more heartburn or less heartburn you'll have later on. So just recognize that. The example that I have, I shared this with James when we were working on this presentation, is I think about two friends going to the movies. So James and I are going to the movies, and we sit down, get our concessions at the concession stand, go into the theater, come out of the theater 2 hours later, and we look at one another and said, "How was the movie?" And James says, "Oh, it was awesome. It was great. I saw a really good preview I was excited about. The popcorn balance of butter was perfect, and I thought the movie was great." And then he asks me, and I go, "Well, you know what? They serve Coke, and I like Pepsi, and I wasn't really excited about the previews, and there was a kid that kept kicking my seat the whole time, and honestly, the book was way better than the movie." We sat next to each other for 2 hours in that theater, and we had totally different experiences. So there's only so much of it that is within our control. So why does experience matter? Thinking through that and understanding what that looks like. Investing in experience and investing in being a donor is just as important, if not more so, than becoming a donor. So you heard James start off the conversation today by saying that this is a landscape that's probably the most underinvested in the fundraising sector, and I would agree with that. We take all sorts of budget precautions and preparation to be able to think about investing and becoming a donor. But once you've become a donor, are we making those same investments in figuring out and understanding how to retain you and how to keep you being a donor, right? There's a cost to that, whether it's staff time, budget time, mailings, events, experiences, all of those sorts of things play a role in that. So when we think about experience as a driver to retention, when we think about experience as upgrading behaviors and lifetime value and the impact that it has there, experience really shapes how donors feel about our organization. And it shapes how the donors then see themselves. And so when a donor has a poor early experience with us, that can really limit the chance to convert them from an annual to a mid-level donor. If your donors have that inconsistent experience, it can weaken major gift opportunities or relationships down the road. So being able to think about this intentionally, no matter where they fall in the donor cycle or the pipeline or the giving threshold levels, we want to make sure that it's a consistent experience across the board. So when we think about this, we think about really understanding the life cycle as a whole. So James, there, thank you. And so we wanted to put together a life cycle. We see this in a variety of ways, but really starting by thinking about the sort of the pre-gift or the first gift. I love what James said earlier when he talks about that first gift, or the stewardship and engagement and cultivation happening before the first gift even comes in the door. And that's absolutely right. So as we think about this, we want to really unpack, what do the donors need from an emotional standpoint? What is your org doing that could be adjusted or might be missing? And really defining for yourselves, for each shop, what does good actually look like? And then talk through that internally and have some conversations. So this slide is meant to be a prompt to help offer some insights in that and perspective surrounding that. James, do you have anything you want to add on this before I move on to the next one?
No, I'm going to talk in a little bit about the whole idea of a recognition to renewal plan, and I think that plays perfectly well into this. It's all part of that life cycle, but really comes down to plotting out the steps so that you can control as much of that experience as possible, knowing that we can't control all of it to your earlier point. So no, I'll come back to that in a moment.
Perfect. So we're going to touch on strategy. I'm going to start and then kick it over to James here. But start by if anybody's worked in the higher ed sector, in particular, this is sort of where the SOCs tend to be popular. But I think that it's important to recognize that SOCs alone don't necessarily build relationships. So thinking about a transactional approach is an opportunity to really make sure that you're thinking transactionally, but transformationally. So I think there's times and places for things like this, but really thinking about making sure that we're looking holistically at that long-term experience. So thinking about that journey from this very start and beyond. And I think one of the most important things to remember is that oftentimes, depending on how our organizations are structured, if we have teams that are working in silos on different phases of an experience or a journey, that's oftentimes where there's a miss or a disconnect. So that opportunity to remember that if experience is everyone's job and you have 8 departments that are working on experience independently, how are you taking the time to pause and engage and make sure that you're not providing an inconsistent experience? There might be 8 different great ideas that are happening there, but if they're happening independently and not necessarily aligned, you risk that inconsistency from a donor's perspective. So you can have much stronger outcomes if you have those conversations and work in that collaborative style and collaborative approach. Again, it goes back to what I shared earlier. Thinking about experience is really that connective tissue across the entire donor life cycle.
So you don't like socks, Angela?
Well, I mean, I have a fair share of them, and I'm not saying that they don't have a purpose, but if that's the only thing, then I think you're missing an opportunity to re-engage. I'm not saying that there aren't people that give once a year just to get the latest version of socks. There's
Right.
plenty of But so I think it's finding the balance that works for your organization.
I think that's the key point there is there's plenty of places that do campaigns like this. I have, before I joined BWF, I was a practitioner and I have done campaigns where you make a gift and you get something in return, even socks. Um, I think if that's the end of it, that's where we're missing the point. It's like there's a big opportunity here for like um we you get the socks, take pictures of your socks, share the socks, or have repeat things each year so people can start to look forward to those things. If that's a means to an end to get you to your revenue goals that are really critical, even if it's just a way of getting new donors in the door, that's okay. The message here doesn't have to be like don't do premium campaigns. The message is don't just do premium campaigns. Don't, and you're basically a retail store where it's a transactional environment. You give something, you get something. By all means, this sort of stuff can be fun and good, but what are you also doing to make sure that the donors are really understanding? So, a simple example is you make a gift and you get something in return, a premium item. We should still be talking about the impact of that gift. We should still be talking to the donors, even if their primary motivation was just because they wanted the pair of socks, which let's face it, a good chunk of them, that probably is why they gave. That's still an opportunity for us to talk about what that gift and the gifts of everybody else who gave to this campaign together, what that accomplished from a revenue standpoint. And that's how we can start to really build community, talk about impact. So it's just, we've got to remember to dot the T's and dot the I's and cross the T's. Is that the phrase? Yeah. It doesn't end with sending out the premium item and then moving on. And just to respond to a couple of things, Tracy, yes, we can get a PDF of the donor life cycle slide to you. We'll take note of your email there. And do see, Brianna, your question in the chat. I have a couple of notes in front of me. We are going to respond to that in due course as well. So if you have any other questions, by all means, put them in the Q&A and we can answer them there. Or you can also use the chat for your commentary as well. So we want to, think about like strategy has to be a shared thing. Creating this sort of shared sense of ownership. We don't want silos. I've been asked this question more times than I care to remember. Where should donor relations live? Should it be part of the annual giving team? Should it be part of the major gifts team? Should it be its own thing? And I gotta be honest, it's my response, whether I say this out loud or not, my response is usually I don't care where it lives. Org charts are the least interesting thing in the world to me because org charts don't get anything done. Org charts are just a way of laying out where people report and all this stuff. And if we think about org charts as function, then it just creates those cycles. One of those, there's two terrible things, phrases that I always have to sort of interject when I hear them and tell people like, don't say that. That's not good. Both of them related to new experience. The first is my least favorite, which is less relevant here, but it's the great thing about monthly giving is that it's set it and forget it. Horrible strategy. If your goal is to have people forget that they're giving to your organization, that's not good. That's yes, you may get some short-term wins and get some revenue there, but we really want people to be fully aware that they're donating to your organization and enjoying the experience of being a donor. So I fundamentally disagree with that idea. The second one is here, my dear fellow annual giving professionals say, well, my job is to ask for money and donor relations thanks them for the gift. That's a crazy idea. If you separate those two things and think that it's not your job to say thank you, you are really missing the point about what fundraising is and what it should mean to be a donor. Now, who does the work is a different question. Like, who's responsible for writing appeals is not necessarily the same person as who's going to design the appeal and who's going to work with a mail house or an email platform to get that appeal out to people. And at the same time, there might be another person who is primarily responsible for sending out acknowledgement letters and impact reports and things like that. That's just splitting up the workload. But any self-respecting annual giving director, anybody responsible for fundraising, should absolutely care about the donor relations part of the process, should absolutely care about how donors are being thanked. That doesn't mean they need to report to you. That's not important in this situation. It's that you have to work together to come up with a shared strategy around how do we ask people to give and how do we show our appreciation and our gratitude and how do we say thank you. So forget what your role is. It's a team sport. Everyone's got their important part to play. Um, and I do think, you need to have some sort of collective vision about how you can improve that experience. Most places are not going to be, maybe careful how I say this, but most places are not overstaffed when it comes to their donor experience work. Like there's usually more work that needs to be done than there's people to do the work. Um, I hope that, if there's fundraisers out there and you're giving people who like working with under-resourced donor relations, donor experience teams, that they're stepping in to help because that's going to be so important to your retention rates and everything else. Um, and I will, after I get off my soapbox, Angela, I'll kick it back to you here.
It's all good. It's all good. Yeah, so I would echo wholeheartedly what James says, that it's not about where it lives, it's about that it happens. And I had a former boss that spoke a lot about the fact that everybody in the organization is a fundraiser, and everybody in
Mhm.
the organization is important, is tasked with expressing gratitude in a variety of ways. So everybody plays both those roles. It's not one team's responsibility. We all play our roles. Doesn't mean that you're a fundraiser actually asking for money, but the work we do supports and enhances the fundraisers. So when we think about really being intentional with that experience, we're going to talk about this, and then I'll kick it to James to go in and sort of break it down and show it more in action in a minute. But really thinking about things like welcome journeys are a good opportunity to dive into, or trigger-based approaches of outreach, so that when this happens, then we do this and navigate that, and really being intentional about those thoughtful upgrade moments, and making sure that we're passing the torch appropriately. So when somebody shifts from annual giving and then all of a sudden they're in a major gift portfolio, if they make that transition, what does that transition process look like? Or when we're moving from unassigned to assigned, or we think about it a lot from a portfolio transition perspective. Our fundraising frontline staff thinks about it from that lens, but how are we thinking about that from the work that we're doing, and when we're engaging through volunteering or through opportunities to sort of make that connection and make those warm handoffs and keep that continuation and that connection going. I think and then the last thing that I would just chime in and is add is that we talk a lot about personalization, and that's a hot button issue, and we hear that a lot in this space. And thinking about that in a variety of ways, so that it's not just the name. Certainly that's, anytime we can use names instead of just dear friend, we want to do that. But really thinking about, what does that look like at a deeper level? How do we show the donors that we know them and that we see them for who they are and that we understand them, and gathering that information so that we can have that connection go deeper, so that it moves again from that transactional to that transformational and more relationship driven. So I'm going to kick it to you, James.
I do echo that. The relevance, personalization is important, but relevance is more important than personalization. Getting things that people are interested in front of them are the most important thing we can do. Here's a simple takeaway. This is something everybody can do. It's not going to cost you any money to do this. It's going to cost you a little bit of time, and then it's time and an ongoing basis to execute this. But there's a lot of ways you can automate some of this, use some low or no code tools. So, Brianna, this is part of the answer to your question about things that small organizations with small development teams can do to implement that pipeline. So, just a part of the answer to your question. I call this the recognition to renewal journey. Really, what this is mapping out what you want to happen in the days, weeks, and months after a gift is made. I often will do this all the way through about like an 18-month cycle with clients, but ultimately break it down into three key phases. So phase one is all about acknowledgement and gratitude. I'm sorry. I pressed the wrong button. So this is all about, how do we want the donor to feel in the first few days after they've made that gift, and then how can we facilitate that and help that feeling to be there. So um, how are we going to show appreciation in a meaningful way? I don't think that this means, you've got to say thank you a certain number of times. I would argue that it's a quality over quantity thing. I think Angela has some other evidence around like how many times it's important to say thank you before your next ask. But to me, it's about like, what are the quality interactions that we can facilitate? so that it feels really good to be a donor. So that immediately after somebody did that, they were like, that was a good decision. I'm glad I did that. I got something out of it, which is that feeling of helping somebody or helping a cause I care about, supporting the mission of an organization I care about. Phase two, my favorite topic at the moment is fundraising between the asks. I have a whole slide on this next. But this is everything that happens between the gift and the next ask. All of that is absolutely fundraising work, even if you're not actually asking for money. This is kind of the wild card phase in all of this. There can be a big variance here in the duration. It might, depending on the type of organization you are and what kind of goals you have. This phase can be very short and actually happens, takes place over just a few weeks or months until you get into that next ask. For other places, this is more like a 9 to 12 month waiting period. I think you got to find a balance there. And one of the things you want to do, and again, Brianna, another part of your question, you're saying that you make phone calls and you send thank you letters and then you're sending appeals every 2 months. Part of what I would look at there is what are the conversion rates and the retention rates, two different things there. Conversion rates on those appeals that are going pretty soon after the last appeal, and how is that affecting overall retention? Could we elevate the retention rate and elevate the conversion rate by reducing the number of appeals and focusing a little bit more on all of that stuff we do between those asks happening? Think of this as like a strategic engagement phase, and it's a very important part of it. It's not just like a waiting period. It's a very intentional part before you get ready for the next ask. And then phase three is the ready to give phase. So now you've talked about impact, you've talked about community, your donor feels really good about that last gift. They are theoretically ready to give now. We have a tool that we're using with clients now. It's called our AI powered ready to give score. And it's essentially a score that it's like a traditional annual giving likelihood model, except it increases over time as the donor gets closer to the part where we predict their next gift will happen. So really great if you have habitual donors, like somebody who gives every December. We can start to predict that that's when they're likely to make their next gift. So in January, February, that score is actually going to be pretty low, even though the traditional model would tell you that's a high likelihood donor. They're not ready to ask. They're going to get more ready as the year goes on. As we get to October, November, that's when you should be preparing for your ask. Also predicting the next gift amount there so that we can really tailor our ask around that particular donor. It's also super helpful for those sort of infrequent donors who give every couple of years or give multiple gifts in a year. It helps us predict when they're likely to take action again. And we can pull engagement data into that as well. So if they're opening all of your emails or clicking on things, or if they're attending events, that score can be influenced by that and increase as time goes by.
James, I'm going to chime in to answer a quick
Yeah.
question that popped up in the chat. An example of personalization, things that somebody can do and an org can do besides just the names. So, Mary, one of the my favorite things that I've seen, and it sounds really simple, but it can be really impactful for donors, is as you get to know the donors, find ways to make sure that whoever is interacting with them directly, oftentimes it's your gift officers, or if you have student callers, they might have the opportunity to gather some intel, and track that information and what you learn in your database, and make it easy so that when you can pull it out, so that if a newsletter drops, let's say you're a university and there's a newsletter that comes out about a new program that's happening on campus, and then you can look at your database and go, who are the donors that I know are interested in this topic? I want to make sure that I send them this. Or if there is something happening on campus that you think might be relevant to them, or in your community. If you're not a university system, maybe it's something happening in your community that you think that they would be want to be informed about or find insights into. So gathering that information and those insights from your interactions with your donors, and then tracking it in a way that you can then sort of bucket it. And the higher the donors engage with you, the more they engage with you as you get to the major gift and even into the principal gift level, understanding what we would think about as donor preferences and gathering that information makes it a lot easier. How many of you have had a conversation, or if you're in the donor relations space, odds are pretty good that somebody's shown up at your desk and said, hey, so-and-so is turning 50 next week and I need a birthday gift. Do you have any ideas? If you've thought about this intentionally and engaged and coached your development officers to look for those cues, then you can gather that information and track it in a way that then when that conversation comes up, yes, they're really into gardening. And so I want, let's put together some sort of gardening thing if that's the right thing. Or maybe you don't want to give them a gift. So maybe you want to invite them to the next visit. And instead of having coffee, you're going to take a tour of a local community garden to go and engage with. And so understanding those opportunities, I think there's real value in that. James, I'll kick
So
it back to
just
you.
like just like the idea that everyone is a fundraiser, it's the same concept here. Everything we do is fundraising, even if it's not actually asking for the gift. And this is the way we need to change our mindset a little bit. It's the culture of building that, sorry, the practice of building that culture of philanthropy through consistent communication. Traditionally, like base level giving, annual giving programs are really focused on that last touch model of gift attribution, where we send out an appeal, we get a gift, and we say that appeal generated this much money, this many donors. That's a very direct response mindset, very tactical work. It means we what's the phrase I'm looking for here? We undervalue everything that happens between that I would argue is just as important. An analogy I use here is if a major gift officer has 6 meetings with a donor, and on the sixth meeting they get a gift agreement signed, and they go back to the office and they say, I got the gift agreement. And the chief development officer doesn't turn around and say, That's great. Next time, don't have the first 5 meetings. You can just have that sixth meeting again. Because everybody understands that it took multiple conversations to get to the part where we were ready to make the ask and where we got a yes. It's the same thing at the base level as well. We have to do these steps in between those asks to make sure that people feel the gratitude that we're sharing, they feel the impact of their support, and they feel that sense of community. So a whole variety of things you can do, whether, across different channels, utilizing video in different ways, talking about impact through magazines and stuff like that. There's sort of endless options that you could do here, but it's about making sure that you are doing things beyond just asking for support. And then this is a key piece of research here that BWF has worked on over the years. First of all, we define engagement as a feeling. It's engagement is how somebody feels about an organization more so than the actual tracked activity. When you ask donors how they feel about an organization or how engaged they feel, you get some very revealing results. Did my screen just stop sharing?
Yes, it did.
Okay, my presentation deck disappeared. So give me 1 second to bring that, unless you have it up, Angela.
I do.
Yeah, sorry about
No, that's okay.
This is a new one.
Yeah, I've never had to do that before.
Let's go here. All right, I am ready to go. And if I disappear, send help. I'm struggling to see my share button. Sorry about this, everyone. Okay, I think we're back in action. So, how somebody feels, if they feel engaged, they are 8 times more likely to say that that organization is their number one giving priority, 14 times more likely to become a major donor, and 4 times more likely to increase their giving by 10 times over. So there's some really good payoffs here that show us that the more engaged somebody feels with an organization, the more likely they are to give. And that is another reason why this is so important. Investing in this idea of donor experience really does pay off. And we need to be thinking about that when we think about ROI. Couple other things from me, and I know we're getting tight on time here, but just some work we did with a client recently, and I wanted to share more broadly. We're looking at some industry insights around loyalty programs, and there's a variety of studies here. This one's from Deloitte. There's a McKinsey one and a BCG one as well, but ultimately they show the loyalty programs do influence consumer behavior, like repeat purchase spending satisfaction. But they're actually better as retention tools than they are as loyalty creators. So, well, the idea of this is like people don't think, all right, I'm going to start flying a lot. I'm going to look at the various different loyalty programs and choose the first airline I fly with and then stay loyal to that airline. It's not really how it happens. What happens is they start flying more consistently on, say, Delta or American. And then they get into the loyalty program and they start enjoying that feeling of status, the way that those airlines reward you for and say nice things to you and give you that feeling of exclusivity. And that becomes the thing that drives loyalty. So next time they go to book a flight, they think, I'm a Delta person, I'm going to fly on Delta, or I'm a Hilton person or a Marriott person. I think we can apply this in a lot of ways to our sort of recognition programs. Oftentimes recognition programs that we design are not the reason somebody's going to give in the first place. There's another reason they give in the first place, but then they make that gift and they get into this society or this program. And if they have a really good experience and it feels really good to be part of that, that can become a reason why they want to continue to give and want to continue to give at a specific level. So let's jump into pipeline real quick and last few minutes here. We had a white paper a few years ago. You may have seen this before, but we took data from 12 different colleges and universities. We had about just under 13,000 people studied who had made a first-time gift under $1,000 and went on to give over $25,000. And this is a really amazing way to look at the long-term ROI of base level giving. So over time, people average 42 gifts per person over 26 years. So it's quite a long time that you have to give this to pay off. But if you give it that time, there's an average of $450 million per institution. And some of these schools were very small, by the way. This is a lot of money given over the lifetimes of donors who started out not giving a whole lot. Everyone loves the story of, the donor who starts out giving $10 and goes on to give millions of dollars. That's an anomaly. That's not going to happen to most institutions in their lifetime. But it does happen on a smaller scale much more frequently if we invest in things like donor experience and building that culture of philanthropy over time.
So putting it to work. Here's the three big things. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Consistency builds trust. Experience should feel seamless from the first gift to the major gift and beyond. And everybody plays a role using behaviors, timing, and signals to inform that experience strategy. So I think we've covered most of the questions. I want to dive really quickly into metrics because that's come up in the chat a couple times. And thinking about that, one of the most impactful things that happened at a shop that I used to work was that the overall fundraising goal for the organization was not only an org goal for the fundraisers, but it became an org goal, an official individual goal for everybody in the organization, no matter where we sat. And that gave us a sense of understanding and buy-in to really realize the value that we brought to the table, no matter what seat we sat in. So even thinking about some of those existing metrics that other people are measured on, we can't necessarily do site visits, but what are some of those other common metrics and how does that relate to the work that you do in the seat that you sit in? So with that, I think we've covered all the Q&As that were submitted. So thank you so much. You will get the recording. And we've got a teaser. We've got the next webinar coming up from our colleagues related to lessons learned from health system mergers and database consolidation. That never happens in our landscape. So if you want to learn more about that, highly recommend tuning in for that one. And we're so grateful that you took an hour out of your day to spend with us. Really appreciate the time. Stay in touch, stay connected. We're just grateful for the collaboration and the partnership that we have with all of you and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.